Welcome to the Big Four Accounting Firms podcast, brought to you by big4accountingfirms.com and the Big Four Accounting Firms YouTube channel. Before we get started, just wanted to remind everybody to support us if you have a chance or if you can. Even $1 helps, and we have a link in the description to a website called Buy Me a Coffee. It's just a way to donate to us and support us. Again, any amount is helpful so that we can keep putting out content. And there's also other ways for you to support us in the show notes to this podcast or on YouTube in the description. In today's podcast, wanted to discuss, also a personal story or just personal experience. I thought about in the past doing a course over, all the little things in the Big Four accounting firms that you encounter over and over again, because I think that is something that people could utilize a lot of in their careers, is utilizing on people's past experiences and what to expect. Because if you work in the Big Four accounting firms long enough, then you run into the same issues over and over again. And one of the issues that I recently ran into is you get deep into a project and the client hasn't reviewed anything for a while, and they finally get around to reviewing it, and what ends up happening is that they have a bunch of comments where, it changes everything on the project. You have to go back and revise everything that you already did, and everybody has to redo their work. It's not only your work, whatever level you're at. So people below you, maybe it's, if you're outsourced, then it's the people that you outsource to. They have to redo everything. So it's something that you run into in the Big Four accounting firms, where the clients don't review anything, and then they come in and they have a whole bunch of review comments. And then so you have a certain budget on your client, typically, on most engagements you do. And then if they end up revising everything or changing expectations along the way, then it blows your budget, or you have to reconsider your budget. Then you have to rerun the budget or think about the budget as you're trying to get work done as well. And so this is something that you're going to have to deal with if you work in the Big Four accounting firms. And it's something that a lot of people have to deal with. And I guess to the newer people, this is something you have to learn about the Big Four accounting firms and working in the client business. You're not going to be constantly learning new things. You're going to have to deal with a bunch of logistical issues, and you can avoid them like a lot of people do, but then it ends up just becoming an issue later. Because some people just like to focus on the technical stuff and they don't focus on delivering to the client, but it's important. And being able to consider things like this is important. But along the same lines, another thing that I wanted to talk about is clients that pretend like everything is new. There's some clients where every year they pretend like everything is new. And it could be a client, but it could also be superior to you, whether it's manager, senior manager, partner, where every year, no matter what the engagement, even if they've been on the engagement, they ask the same question, or they ask something that's already been established. They ask why it's being done that way, and they've been part of the process. And it's really frustrating when you're dealing with a client like that, because, again, back to the budget discussion, it could blow the budget if they ask a million questions. The million questions again, like the same questions over and over again, or just day one type questions where it's something they should have already known. It's something if they've been at the company a while, they should already know. But then the other danger with not only the client, but the Big Four accounting firms, is that people quit a lot and change jobs a lot. And so what a lot of people will do, whether it's in the Big Four accounting firms or at the client, they'll try to establish themselves by questioning every single thing and take no ownership and no responsibility. And this is something very common in accounting. People just don't take responsibility for what's been done in the past, and they try and question it and reinvent the wheel. It could be audit, tax, consulting, whatever. And if they really did reinvent the wheel on these engagements, then I mean, it raises a lot of questions about prior years. Well, what typically ends up happening, I guess, where I can offer the most advice in this area is that people come in hot, ready to ask a million questions, ready to reinvent the wheel, ready to tackle the engagement, ready to make it the number one engagement in the world, put all the best review procedures, review the complete trial balance from top to bottom, dig into transactional details, be a hero. But what ultimately ends up happening is that deadlines come. And when deadlines come, that's where everything changes the game, because everybody has plenty of time until the deadline comes, and then everything gets shoved into the closet. And so my advice is don't get super frustrated by this. Be used to it. It's the same in the big four accounting firms and industry, because industry, it doesn't matter if industry's slow paced. At some point, and whatever company you work for in industry, people do try and position themselves. It might not be this year or next year, because if you work in industry, things are a little slower. But at some point, somebody's going to want to move up. And when people want to move up, they try and reinvent the wheel. And you just need to be ready for that. You need to not get frustrated. This is something very common in the big four accounting firms and accounting in general. So don't be surprised by it. And it's the deadlines that always make sure things get done. Because if there were no deadlines in the big four accounting firms or in accounting in general, like everybody would dig into every transactional detail. They would make sure it's in compliance with every regulatory requirement that ever existed. If you're in tax, it's all these informational forms you have to fill. If it's an audit, then you're fulfilling all your review procedures. You're probably going outside of your materiality and scope to get an understanding. You're making sure that all the controls, like every single control that ever existed, is there to catch everything. But then the deadline comes, you get another client, or you get another workload, or if you work in industry, your company acquires a new entity and you have way more work to do, or you have a new compliance filing that you have to file. So it's just, these are some of the frustrations, and I think it's important to discuss it other than just news and raises and which accounting firm is the best, because this is what you're going to run into on a day-to-day basis. And people think there's a holy grail of a workplace where you can find none of these problems. And you can be in a job for years and not experience these problems. And I guess if that's your ultimate goal, then that's good for you. But at some point it's going to hit you, because even if you're in a job, you're in a big company that you like, it's somewhat slow paced and it's very enjoyable. That's only going to last for so long before you're either sold, acquired, and you don't know what's going to happen to your department. So it's this type of stuff happens all the time. And since it happens at the big four accounting firms, and the big four accounting firms employees end up at other places, then it ultimately makes its way to everywhere. But these are just some of the frustrations that you can experience at the big four accounting firms. It's like a brochure, right? But it's just, you need to think about these, and the people that work in the big four accounting firms have to deal with this all the time. And it's easy to get frustrated, but you also have to develop your own personal plan about how you deal with these. And I would also encourage people to write down their issues that they face every year and how it got resolved, or how they want to resolve it. But you need to just keep a list of this stuff and be prepared for it every year. And on a lot of clients, as I said before, you'll see the same questions asked every year by your superior in the big four or at the client. So you need to create a list of those too and have those ready every year. And you don't need to provide those at the beginning of the engagement to whoever you're working with. But as soon as they ask a question, you'll have your go-to list of answers. You'll have it ready. If you have a memo in the file, then keep that in the file and keep it updated. so that people can refer to it. But not only for them, when people ask those type of questions, you shouldn't be like, well, it's in the memo to the file. You should refer to the file and use that as reference to provide answers to them. Because you'll learn this as well. Like if you tell people it's already in there, or it's, you should know this, or it's in the prior year file. Like people are going to get frustrated, especially senior people, because senior people have a lot of stuff to do and they don't want to hear that type of stuff. Same thing with the client. Like if you tell them you asked this last year or you provided this same thing last year and it didn't work, then they're going to get angry. You just need to have something ready to reference as to what the answer is, or, a certain request that you ask the client. But I guess to wrap up around this topic, it's easy to get mired down in this stuff as well. The little monotonous things in the big four accounting firms. I talk about this a lot. But you could also, all this stuff can add up and lead you to be disenchanted and frustrated. But one of the things that I could offer from my experience is don't let that hinder your ability to learn. Raise your head up from the logistical nightmares at the big four accounting firms and make sure you're learning the most difficult topics. You don't need to be learning them every single day, but you need to have some time where you take time out of your day and learn the most difficult topics. Because if you don't, you can get stuck in managing other people's workload, managing your partner's workload in their admin. But you need to raise up and learn the most difficult topics and the most difficult areas so that you can progress in your career in the big four accounting firms and in industry. So all these logistical little nightmares pop up and you need to be ready to respond to them. You also need to be ready to move forward in your career, technically, but also politically. You need to raise up from your daily stuff and make sure that you're progressing the way that you want to progress. So that's the podcast for today. Stay up to date. Make sure to subscribe to this podcast to get future updates. And you can support us financially through the Buy Me a Coffee link in the show notes to this podcast. There's other information in those show notes as well, so make sure to check those out. Thanks for listening.